So this time I want to talk about plants with compound leaves. They're not in the same family. All of these are dicots, but their leaves coming off of the main stem here are divided up. So they have that main midrib though, and then they have several leaflets off to the side. So that's the only thing that holds this group together. There are a few relatives, like we'll talk about a few in the carrot family, but for the most part these are just an unrelated group of plants. So let's start with the biscuit roots. Few important things that I want to point out with these. One, they're just a really common plant in central Washington. All over the Columbia Plateau, you will find members of this genus, Lomatium, and so it's very common, and you'll hear them referred to as biscuit roots or sometimes desert parsley. And both of those should kind of make you think, along with the carrot family, these do kind of look like carrots. I mean, look at these leaves over here all dissected up and kind of ferny looking. They kind of look like dill or parsley, celery, carrots, even cumin are all in this carrot family. And they have a similar kind of chemical profile. When you smell the leaves, you'll smell kind of that carroty, parsley-like smell. They also, many of them, have a pretty thick rootstock. Obviously carrots do, and that's why we eat them. And these plants were also a staple food source for people of the Columbia Plateau. Before we came out and grew crops, they would dig up the roots of these plants and eat them. So they had a really starchy rootstock, and that was an important source of food. They also would eat some of them, and the leaves have a lot of vitamin C, so they're important greens in the spring. Be careful with these, though. They're difficult to identify. They're just really technical features that differentiate them. Some are toxic, and some are really nutritious. So it's not a plant you just want to go out and pick and start nibbling on. You'll find these in the lowlands all the way up into the mountains, just different species in each place. The ones in the lowlands, the more deserty areas, bloom in the spring, kind of fed by that starchy rootstock. And the ones a little higher up tend to bloom in the summer. One other feature that holds this whole carrot family together is their flower arrangement. It's known as an umbel. And so here it is in this picture I'm circling. It looks like kind of a firework exploded. Out of this one point, all these branches come out, and then each of those even branch again, kind of like those double fireworks sometimes you see. And so that type of inflorescence is known as an umbel, and when you see one of those, that's probably in the carrot family. All right, so there's one biscuit root. There are quite a few others in this group. You can see that they all have usually finely dissected leaves. They all have those umbels, but the flowers range from white to purple to yellow is pretty common as well. Again, hard to identify, so I just kind of am going to leave it at this group of biscuit root or desert parsley and let you enjoy them from there. So one last plant in the carrot family, and a good one to know because it is toxic. Like some of the desert parsleys, poison hemlock, definitely toxic. It's the one that killed Socrates. So good one to recognize, and kind of a warning to not go out and just nibble on wild plants unless you know what you're doing. This one actually looks like a hemlock we've studied before in the conifer group, and that one's actually kind of named after this one. The branches of that are kind of fine and ferny, like so many members of the carrot family. Their leaves are fine and fern looking, so they called that one a hemlock. That one's not poisonous, but this one is. How would you know that it's poison hemlock? Well, first of all, it'd probably be in a wetland area, and usually a disturbed wetland. Floods, roads, grading, something like that happen, and often you'll find just a whole stand of this and almost nothing else. They get pretty tall. They'll be at least waist high, and just a whole bunch of them. They die back in the winter, but in the spring or the summer, they'll be just tall, lush plants, and they have these purple spots on the stems. Those purple spots are a giveaway. Another clue is that it's in the carrot family. You see these umbels, like we talked about before, of flowers, and you'd know, stay away from this plant. Moving on from the carrot family to the sumac family, a couple of these, and they clearly have these compound leaves. Anywhere from like 9 to 29 leaflets. There's always an odd number because there's one here at the very tip. The rest of them paired, these long, glossy green leaflets. And these turn a brilliant, brilliant red in the fall, so easy to notice, along with kind of late summer, this little pyramid or cone of reddish berries at the top of each stem. You probably see these along highways, so I'm pretty sure you've seen the plant just about anywhere you head out of Yakima. You're going to see these on the hillsides. They seem to do well with some disturbance when they get established, so pretty common to see them just right around the highways. Fairly tall plant often, so this one over here on the right, probably a little over head high, sometimes even taller than that if they're really healthy. And if you are really sensitive to poison ivy, and you know you are, then this is a good one to avoid messing with. A lot of taxonomists will put poison ivy in the same genus, Rus, as this one. Some call them different, but they are closely related, and people that are sensitive to poison ivy will often get their skin irritated with this. Kind of like they would cashews, because cashews are in the sumac family as well. So sometimes people need to avoid those because of allergies. So speaking of that, poison ivy, here I put it in the genus Toxicodendron. It's a close relative of poison oak, two slightly different plants. Differences are not that important, but they also have compound leaves, but just in threes. So over here on this left image, you can see big clusters of leaves, but every time we got 1, 2, 3, and sometimes you'll hear leaves of 3, let it be. Poison ivy, at least around central Washington, is pretty small in terms of a plant. It may get up to knee-high, a little bit taller perhaps, but just a couple stems coming out of the ground. They spread underground, and so you usually find them in stands. The leaflet margins can be smooth, or they can be wavy like this one down here, even on the same plant. Actually, kind of a pretty plant. They lose their leaves in the fall, and then all you're left with was this big single stalk of woody tissue sticking up in the air, but it does give you a signal that you should stay away from it because it still will make you itch. These little white berries get left behind. And if you see a little stem sticking up with white berries, stay away. That's poison ivy. So good one to be able to recognize just for the purpose of avoiding it, most likely. Well, the next two members of our group with compound leaves are both in the barberry family. You've probably seen this one in the forest or maybe even in your yard. These pretty yellow flowers, which are kind of unusual in that they have 6 petals. Not a real common arrangement for the eudicot group, but these do. They have 6 petals, and they produce these blue berries that the birds just love, and they go and drop them elsewhere. And so you pretty commonly have this one just cropping up in your yard, even though you didn't plant it there. It's probably thanks to a bird. So you recognize them because they have these compound leaves. Like over on the right, you can see just this mass of leaves. They're very shiny. You can see that nicely in the middle one, just really thick, leathery leaves coated with a really thick layer of wax, which helps them to resist drought. And the edges of these, maybe we can see it best on the picture on the left, have pretty stout spines. So they're not going to puncture you, but when you try to pull them out in your yard or clip down the hedges, they do poke you quite a bit. And if you're walking through with shorts, not a pleasant one. So not horribly violent plant, but they will get you. The leaves don't fall off. They're evergreen, but just occasionally they turn red. Sometimes you'll see a plant with just one leaf that's completely red, and the rest are green. So they kind of lose them irregularly, probably just as they age or get nibbled off. Not a lot of animals mess with these and eat them. There are quite a few different species of Oregon-grape, but this is probably the most common one that you'll find. Another relative of that is Vanillaleaf. You've probably also seen this in the forest, but definitely not in your yard. This really is just a forest-dwelling species, likes pretty shady environments, as you can tell, especially by that middle photo. But when you look at this, you would not necessarily think it's related to that other plant that we just saw that's a shrub. This is not a shrubby plant. It's herbaceous. It has a perennial rootstock and spreads by rhizomes. So like on the photo on the left here, you'll usually find big stands of it. And it is deciduous. The whole upper part of the plant goes yellow, fades, and gets buried under the snow for the winter. And then they pop back up from those underground rootstocks. They send up this little white flowering stalk of a bunch of little flowers, produce just these little dry fruits. Some people kind of look at these leaves. So this is a compound leaf. Remember, it got 3 leaflets, a bit like poison oak, but its resemblance kind of stops there. But some people kind of look at these and say these look like big antlers over here. Put a couple of eyes on this and a big nose, and you have something that looks like a moose. So it's an interesting way of kind of thinking of this. Why a vanilla leaf, though? Why that name? It smells vaguely vanilla-like when it dries out. I've never gotten it really strongly, but it is a beautiful plant in the forest floor, usually growing in the shade. So one last plant to wrap up the group of compound-leaved plants. Wool breeches, or sometimes it's called ball-head waterleaf, which is kind of a strange name. So this one is in the waterleaf family, and this group includes things like Phacelia or baby blue eyes, if you happen to know those. They all have tubular flowers with 5 petals. And one common feature, if we see on the right here, their stamens tend to stick way out from the petals, give them a really delicate appearance. So that kind of holds the water leaf group together. But these are compound leaves. They're basal, so they all come out of the ground from one spot. They don't usually have a long stem, as we can see on the photo on the left. But these leaves are compound in kind of a different way. So starting here, they go up and the leaflets come off, but then kind of clasp the stem. They don't have their own distinct leaf stalk themselves, so they just are divided up instead of having really distinctive leaflets. Sometimes those leaflets merge together. So still a compound leaf, but looks a little bit different. Like I said, the leaves are basal, and then they send up this one different stem that sometimes has leaves on itself to flower. Usually this happens pretty early in the spring. This is a pretty plant that you'll find from the foothills on up into the mountains and the lower plains as well. And pretty variable. Flowers are kind of whitish to a nice lavender color, sometimes in between. And a nice one to enjoy and know who it is, because very often this will catch your eye and you look and say, oh, what pretty flowers. I wonder what that is. Wool breeches. There you go. Well, I hope you enjoyed another episode learning about plants of Washington State. Until next time, happy botanizing.